Sometimes the person who changes your life is the one you almost never meet. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, how old are you, where are you from, and are you currently in a relationship or interested in someone? Your story might help someone else feel a little less alone. And one subscription to the channel is the motivation that helps me create more meaningful stories. My name is Abigail Harper, and the day I arrived in Chicago, I had exactly $47.12 left in my wallet. That number stayed in my head the entire bus ride from Iowa. $47.12. It was not much to build a new life with, but it was everything I had. The city looked enormous compared to the small farming town where I grew up. Glass towers stretched into the gray sky. Endless traffic filled the streets. People moved so fast that nobody seemed to notice anyone else. I stood outside the bus station, holding a worn duffel bag, and wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. My mother used to say that fear and opportunity often arrived wearing the same face. At that moment, all I could see was fear. By evening, rain had started falling. The cheap motel I planned to stay in had no available rooms, and every other place I checked cost more than I could afford. Exhausted, I walked through unfamiliar streets, searching for somewhere to sit and think. The rain grew heavier. Cold wind pushed against me as I crossed a quiet section of downtown. That was when I noticed a woman standing alone near the entrance of an office building. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then I saw her stumble. The woman reached for a nearby railing but missed. Before I could process what was happening, she collapsed onto a bench beneath the awning. My instincts took over. I hurried across the sidewalk. "Ma'am?" No response. Concern tightened in my chest. The woman appeared to be in her late 50s. Her dark hair was streaked with silver. She wore an expensive tailored coat and carried herself with the kind of confidence that usually made people step aside. Yet at that moment, she looked pale and exhausted. I quickly called for medical assistance and stayed beside her until help arrived. Several minutes later, her eyes opened, green eyes, sharp, intelligent, and surprisingly vulnerable. For a second, she looked confused. Then her gaze settled on me. "You stayed," she said quietly. Of course I stayed. Her expression softened slightly. Most people would not. I shrugged. Where I come from, you do not leave someone alone when they need help. Something about that answer seemed to affect her. Before she could say anything else, emergency personnel arrived and began checking her condition. Relieved, I stepped back. The woman looked as though she wanted to say more, but I did not wait. I had my own problems, a city to survive, a future to build. I picked up my duffel bag and disappeared into the rain. What I did not know was that the woman I had just helped was Victoria Sinclair, one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. And by sunrise, she would be searching the entire city for the poor country girl who had walked away from her without asking for a single thing. The next morning, I woke up on a narrow bed inside the cheapest motel room I could find. The wallpaper was peeling near the ceiling. The air conditioner rattled every few minutes, and the view outside my window was a brick wall. Somehow, it still felt like progress. I was in Chicago. I had survived my first night. That was enough. At least, that was what I told myself. After a quick breakfast consisting of coffee and a bagel from a convenience store, I spent the entire day searching for work. I walked miles through unfamiliar streets carrying copies of my resume, coffee shops, grocery stores, small offices, bookstores. Most places politely told me they were not hiring. Others never looked up from their computers long enough to notice me. By late afternoon, my feet ached and my optimism was fading. That was when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Normally, I ignored unknown calls, but something told me to answer. "Hello, is this Abigail Harper?" The voice belonged to a woman, professional, calm. "Yes. My name is Lauren. I work for Sinclair Global." I nearly stopped walking. Even someone from a small town like mine knew that name. Sinclair Global was one of the largest companies in the country. "There must be some mistake," I said. "Actually, Miss Harper, there is not. Someone at our company would like to meet with you. My confusion deepened. Why? A brief pause followed. Because you helped someone yesterday. Before I could ask another question, Lauren provided an address and offered transportation. I almost declined. Every instinct warned me to be careful. Yet curiosity eventually won. 2 hours later, I found myself standing inside a breathtaking skyscraper overlooking downtown Chicago. The lobby alone looked larger than my entire high school. Polished marble floors reflected elegant lighting. Employees moved with purpose through the building. Everything felt expensive. Everything felt intimidating. Most of all, everything reminded me that I did not belong there. Lauren greeted me near the elevators and escorted me upstairs. As the elevator climbed higher and higher, my nerves grew stronger. Finally, the doors opened onto an executive floor unlike anything I had ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the entire city. Modern artwork decorated the walls. The silence itself seemed expensive. "She is waiting inside," Lauren said. I followed her gaze toward a large office. The moment I stepped through the doorway, I recognized the woman standing beside the window, Victoria Sinclair. She looked healthier than she had during the storm. Stronger, more composed, dressed in an elegant navy suit that perfectly matched her reputation as one of the most successful CEOs in America. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then a small smile appeared on her face. "You disappeared before I could thank you." I shifted uncomfortably. "You looked like you were going to be okay. Most people would have stayed. I had somewhere else to be." The answer surprised her. I could tell. Victoria studied me carefully. Not in an uncomfortable way, more like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "Do you know who I am?" she asked. "Now I do." A hint of amusement appeared in her eyes. "And yet you still look unimpressed." I almost laughed. Should I be impressed? For a second, complete silence filled the room. Then Victoria laughed softly. Lauren looked shocked. I had the strange feeling that not many people spoke to Victoria Sinclair that way. "You are different from most people I meet," Victoria said. "I hear that a lot." Her expression softened. "Abigail, I would like to thank you properly. You already thanked me. That is not what I mean." I immediately sensed where the conversation was heading. Money, gifts, favors, the kind of things powerful people use to solve problems. I shook my head before she could continue. "I do not want anything." For the first time, Victoria seemed genuinely surprised, and in that moment, neither of us realized that my refusal would become the very reason she could not stop thinking about me. Over the next several weeks, I saw Victoria Sinclair far more often than I ever expected, not because I planned to. In fact, I spent most of my time trying to focus on finding stability in a city that still felt too large for me. I eventually found temporary work at a neighborhood cafe during the mornings and spent evenings helping at a community center in exchange for a small stipend. The hours were long, but they paid the bills, barely. One afternoon, while serving coffee during a charity event, I nearly dropped a tray when I spotted Victoria entering the room. She was surrounded by executives, donors, and assistants, yet somehow she noticed me immediately. Her expression softened in a way that made no sense. After the event ended, she approached while I was stacking cups. "You seem determined to stay busy," she said. "Being busy costs less than being unemployed." A quiet laugh escaped her. Fair point. That should have been the end of the conversation. Instead, it became the beginning of many more. Victoria started appearing in unexpected places connected to community projects. At first, I assumed it was coincidence. Later, I learned she personally funded several programs across the city. The more I watched her interact with ordinary people, the more confused I became. Newspapers described her as ruthless. Business magazines called her intimidating. Yet the woman I met always took time to speak with volunteers, teachers, and struggling families. One evening, after helping distribute supplies at a community center, we found ourselves walking toward the parking lot together. "Why do you do this?" I asked. "Do what?" "Spend time here. You could be anywhere." Victoria glanced toward the building behind us. Because success means very little if it only benefits you. The answer stayed with me for days. A week later, she invited me to lunch. I almost refused. Then curiosity won again. The restaurant overlooked Lake Michigan. Everything about it felt expensive, from the view to the silverware. I spent the first 10 minutes worrying that I would accidentally break something. Victoria seemed amused by my discomfort. Relax, Abigail. Easy for you to say. Why? Because you belong in places like this. Something thoughtful crossed her face. And where exactly do you think you belong? I opened my mouth and realized I had no answer. That unsettled me more than the question itself. As the weeks passed, our conversations became longer, more personal. I told her stories about growing up in Iowa, endless cornfields, county fairs, summer storms rolling across open land. Victoria listened with genuine interest. In return, she shared stories about building her company from almost nothing. The pressure, the sacrifices, the loneliness that came with success. One evening, while sitting on a bench outside a community garden, she noticed the silver chain around my neck. You always wear that necklace. Instinctively, my fingers moved to the small pendant resting against my shirt. Always. It must be important. I smiled faintly. It belonged to my mother before she gave it to me. Victoria studied it carefully. Have you ever taken it off? Not once. The answer came immediately. Not since I was 12 years old. Something unreadable flickered across her expression before disappearing. Then it must hold a lot of memories, more than you can imagine. For some reason, the conversation left her unusually quiet. Later, as we walked toward her car, I noticed she seemed distracted. Everything okay? I asked. Victoria looked at me for a moment before answering. Yes. Then she smiled softly. I was just thinking how strange life can be. At the time, I did not understand what she meant. I simply watched her drive away and returned to my tiny apartment. What I did not know was that the small necklace I had worn every day since childhood had just become the center of a mystery that would eventually change everything between us. 2 months after arriving in Chicago, my life looked completely different from the one I had imagined on that long bus ride from Iowa. I still lived in a small apartment. I still worked hard. I still counted every dollar before spending it. But for the first time, I no longer felt completely alone. A surprising amount of that change came from Victoria Sinclair. What began as occasional conversations had slowly become a regular part of my life. Some mornings she would send a simple message asking how my day was going. Other times she would invite me to community events connected to her foundation. Nothing ever felt forced. Nothing ever felt transactional. That was what made it dangerous. I was starting to care. One Friday afternoon, Victoria asked if I would meet her at Sinclair Global headquarters. Why? I asked over the phone. Because I have a proposal. The word proposal immediately made me suspicious. When I arrived, she greeted me personally and led me into a conference room overlooking the city. The skyline stretched for miles beyond the glass walls. You realize this room is bigger than my apartment, I said. Victoria laughed softly. That says more about Chicago rent than it does about this room. I smiled despite myself. Then she slid a folder across the table. What is this? An opportunity. I opened it carefully. The documents described a position within the charitable foundation operated by Sinclair Global, community outreach coordinator, full benefits, competitive salary, educational support. My eyes widened as I read. Victoria, before you say anything, no, this is not charity. Her voice remained calm. The position exists. We need someone who understands the communities we serve. I stared at the pages. There are probably hundreds of people more qualified. Possibly. She leaned back slightly. But I know exactly how you treat people. That matters. For a long moment, I could not speak. The offer represented everything I had been searching for since arriving in Chicago. Stability, purpose, a future. Yet accepting it felt complicated. You are offering me a real job. I am, at your company. Technically at the foundation. That is still your company. Amusement appeared in her eyes. You make it sound suspicious. It feels suspicious. Victoria shook her head. You are impossible. That is what happens when people spend their lives being careful. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. By the end of it, I agreed to think about the offer. 3 days later, I accepted. The decision changed everything. Working for the foundation allowed me to see a side of Victoria few people ever witnessed. Most of the world knew the CEO who negotiated billion-dollar deals and appeared on magazine covers. I saw the woman who remembered volunteers by name, the woman who personally reviewed scholarship applications, the woman who stayed late to help solve problems no one else noticed. The more time we spent together, the harder it became to maintain emotional distance. One evening, after a long day visiting community programs, we stopped at a small cafe near the river. The city lights reflected across the water while boats drifted through the darkness. You seem happier lately, Victoria said. I looked down at my coffee. Maybe, only maybe, I am afraid to get used to good things. The honesty surprised even me. Victoria grew quiet. Then she asked, "Who taught you that?" The question hit harder than expected. I thought about years of uncertainty, financial struggles, promises that never lasted, people who left. Life, I guess. Something softened in her expression. Not everything good disappears, Abigail. The way she said my name made my heart ache in a way I did not fully understand. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The city continued moving around us, while an entirely different kind of silence settled between us. A silence filled with possibilities neither of us were ready to name. Then Victoria's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, and her expression changed. Not fear, not concern, recognition. She quickly declined the call. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just an old situation." Her answer sounded oddly distant. Before I could ask more, she changed the subject. At the time, I let it go. Months later, I would realize that single phone call was connected to a secret neither of us understood yet. The weeks that followed became some of the happiest I could remember. Not because my problems disappeared. They did not. Rent still existed. Bills still arrived. Life remained unpredictable. Yet, for the first time, I felt like I was building something instead of merely surviving. Working for the foundation gave me purpose. More importantly, it gave me a reason to see Victoria almost every day. At first, I told myself that was simply a professional benefit. Eventually, even I stopped believing that explanation. One afternoon, we spent the entire day visiting small towns outside Chicago to review community projects. The drive back took nearly 3 hours. Rain tapped gently against the windows, while the highway stretched endlessly ahead. Victoria sat beside me in the back seat, reviewing reports. Every so often, she would look up and ask my opinion about a proposal. The fact that someone like her genuinely valued my perspective still felt unreal. "You know," she said suddenly, closing a folder, "you have changed this foundation more than you realize." I laughed softly. "I have been here a few months." "Exactly." Her smile was warm. "And people already trust you." I looked out the window, embarrassed by the compliment. "People trust you too." Victoria shook her head. "People respect me." The difference in her tone caught my attention. "That is not the same thing." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I understood. Respect could be earned through success. Trust required something far more personal. Later that evening, we stopped at a small diner along the highway. It reminded me of home, old booths, fresh coffee, friendly staff, the kind of place where everyone greeted each other by name. Victoria seemed completely out of place there, and yet strangely comfortable. Watching her smile at a waitress or listen to local stories made me realize how little the public actually knew about her. Somewhere between dinner and the drive home, I noticed something else. Victoria seemed happier too, lighter, less guarded. The realization stayed with me long after I returned to my apartment. A few days later, I was sorting scholarship applications when I overheard 2 executives speaking outside a conference room. They stopped talking the moment they saw me. The exchange lasted only seconds, but I caught enough to hear my own name. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. When I entered the room, the conversation changed immediately. I tried to ignore it. Unfortunately, curiosity has always been one of my weaknesses. That evening, I found myself wondering why senior executives would be discussing me at all. The question lingered, even after Victoria called to check how my day had gone. I almost asked her, almost. Instead, I kept the concern to myself. As our conversation continued, she told me about an upcoming foundation gala. "You should come," she said. "I do not belong at events like that." Abigail, the way she said my name instantly captured my attention. "You belong anywhere you choose to stand." My heart responded before my mind could. For several seconds, I could not think of a single reply. Eventually, I agreed to attend. After we ended the call, I sat quietly in my apartment, staring at the city lights beyond the window. Everything felt different now, better, hopeful. Yet beneath that happiness, another feeling had begun to grow. The executives, the whispers, the sudden silence when they noticed me. I could not explain why, but something told me there were conversations happening behind closed doors that I knew nothing about. And for the first time since meeting Victoria Sinclair, that possibility frightened me. The foundation gala arrived on a cool autumn evening, and from the moment I stepped into the ballroom, I felt completely out of place. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings that seemed impossibly high. Elegant music drifted through the room. Hundreds of guests filled the space wearing designer clothing that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I stood near the entrance, adjusting the sleeve of a dress I had borrowed from a coworker, and wondered if anyone would notice that I did not belong there. "You look like you are planning an escape route." The familiar voice immediately calmed my nerves. I turned and found Victoria standing beside me. For a moment, I forgot how to speak. She wore a dark emerald gown that perfectly matched her green eyes. Confidence seemed to follow her wherever she went, yet tonight there was something softer about her, something more personal. "I was considering the possibility," I admitted. Victoria smiled. "Stay," one simple word. Somehow it felt impossible to refuse. Throughout the evening, I met donors, educators, volunteers, and community leaders whose lives had been changed by the Foundation's work. Again and again, people approached Victoria with admiration and respect. Yet, despite being the most important person in the room, she kept finding reasons to return to wherever I happened to be standing. At one point, a board member joked about it. "Victoria, I have spent 10 years trying to get this much of your attention." The comment made me laugh. Victoria only smiled and changed the subject. Later, after dinner ended, speeches began. I expected Victoria to speak about finances, growth, and future projects. Instead, she spent most of her speech discussing people, teachers, students, volunteers, communities. Her voice carried genuine passion whenever she spoke about helping others succeed. Watching her from across the room, I felt something shift inside me. The admiration I already felt was becoming something deeper, something harder to ignore. After the speeches concluded, guests moved back onto the ballroom floor. I escaped briefly onto an outdoor terrace overlooking the city. The skyline glittered beneath the night sky. Cool air helped clear my thoughts, or at least that was the plan. "There you are," I smiled before even turning around. Victoria joined me at the railing. For a while, neither of us spoke. We simply watched the city lights together. Finally, she broke the silence. "Do you miss Iowa?" I thought about endless fields, quiet roads, and familiar faces. "Sometimes." "Do you regret leaving?" The answer came surprisingly quickly. "No." Victoria looked at me. "Why?" I hesitated. Then I told the truth. Because if I had stayed, I never would have become the person I am now. Something warm appeared in her eyes. "I am glad you came to Chicago. The simplicity of the statement affected me more than it should have. Before I could respond, movement inside the ballroom caught my attention. Through the glass doors, I noticed two executives speaking in low voices. The moment one of them saw me watching, the conversation ended abruptly. That same uneasy feeling from days earlier returned. "Victoria," I said quietly, "can I ask you something? Always. Why do people keep talking about me?" For the first time all evening, her expression changed. It happened quickly, almost too quickly to notice, but I saw it, a brief flash of concern. Then it disappeared. "What do you mean?" I explained what I had overheard. Victoria listened carefully. When I finished, she looked out at the city rather than at me. "You should not worry about office gossip." The answer felt incomplete, not dishonest, just incomplete. Before I could press further, someone called her name from inside the ballroom. Victoria sighed softly. Duty calls. As she turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something unusual. Worry. Real worry. The sight stayed with me long after she disappeared back into the crowd. Standing alone beneath the city lights, I could not shake the feeling that everyone seemed to know something about my life, except me. After the gala, something changed between Victoria and me. The conversations remained the same on the surface. We still met to discuss foundation projects. We still shared coffee during long workdays. We still exchanged messages that somehow made difficult days easier. Yet, beneath all of that, another layer had appeared, unspoken, impossible to ignore. I found myself looking forward to seeing her more than I should. The realization frightened me because it felt far too important. One afternoon, several weeks later, we traveled to a small town outside Chicago to visit a scholarship program funded by the foundation. The drive there was filled with easy conversation and laughter. The drive back was different. Quiet, comfortable, neither of us seemed to mind the silence. As the city skyline slowly appeared on the horizon, Victoria glanced toward me. "You have been thinking about something all day." I smiled faintly. "You always notice, only when it matters." My heart reacted immediately to those words. I looked away before she could see it. "I was just wondering how different my life would be if I had never come here. Do you wish you had stayed in Iowa?" she asked softly. "No." The answer arrived without hesitation. Victoria smiled. "Then perhaps you already have your answer." Later that evening, she invited me to dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the river. It was not extravagant. It was not public. It felt personal. For nearly 3 hours, we talked about everything except work. Childhood memories, dreams, regrets, the people who shaped us, the mistakes we wished we could undo. At one point, Victoria admitted something I never expected to hear. There were years when I thought success would solve loneliness. Her gaze drifted toward the water outside. It did not. I studied her carefully. For the first time, the powerful CEO disappeared completely. What remained was simply a woman who had spent years carrying more responsibility than anyone should carry alone. "You do not seem lonely anymore," I said quietly. Her eyes met mine. The silence that followed felt different from any silence we had ever shared before. Neither of us looked away. Neither of us spoke. Somewhere deep inside, I knew we were standing on the edge of something neither of us had planned. Then Victoria's phone rang. The moment shattered. She glanced at the screen and immediately declined the call. The same expression I had noticed months earlier returned. Concern, hesitation, something hidden. "The same old situation?" I asked. Victoria seemed surprised that I remembered. "Yes." Before I could ask another question, she changed the subject. Once again, I let it go. Looking back, that was probably my mistake. 3 days later, everything changed. I arrived at the office earlier than usual to prepare reports for an upcoming board meeting. The executive floor was mostly empty. As I passed a conference room, I noticed the door was slightly open. Voices drifted into the hallway. I recognized one of them immediately, Victoria. I was about to continue walking when I heard my own name. Instinctively, I stopped. How much longer are we going to keep this from her? A male voice asked. Until I understand everything, Victoria replied. My stomach tightened. You already investigated her background months ago. Investigated. The word struck like ice. That was necessary, Victoria said. Necessary, the man replied. You reviewed her family history, financial records, school records, employment records. What exactly are you still looking for? I could not breathe. Every conversation, every coincidence, every opportunity. Suddenly they looked different. My hands began shaking. Victoria answered quietly. I am trying to protect her. Then tell her the truth. Silence followed. I did not wait to hear the rest. I walked away before anyone could see me standing there. By the time I reached the elevator, my heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. One question repeated itself again and again. If Victoria truly cared about me, why had she secretly investigated every detail of my life? And worse, what truth was she still hiding from me? I did not answer Victoria's calls that evening, or the next morning, or the day after that. Every time my phone lit up with her name, a painful mixture of anger and disappointment tightened inside my chest. I kept remembering the conversation outside the conference room. Family history, financial records, school records, employment records. The words repeated endlessly in my mind. I had trusted her, more than trusted her. Somewhere along the way, she had become the person whose opinion mattered most to me. Now I could not stop wondering whether every moment between us had been built on information I never agreed to share. 3 days later, Victoria appeared at the foundation office. I saw her through the glass walls of a meeting room. The moment our eyes met, I knew she had been searching for an opportunity to speak with me. I stood and immediately headed toward the exit. Abigail. Her voice stopped me halfway down the hallway. For several seconds, I considered walking away. Instead, I turned around. Victoria looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally. Please, she said quietly, let me explain. Explain what? My voice came out sharper than intended. The part where you investigated my entire life, or the part where everyone else seemed to know except me? Pain crossed her face. It is not what you think. Then tell me what it is. For a moment she seemed unsure where to begin. That hesitation only made everything worse. I never intended to hurt you, she said. That is not an answer. The hallway had become completely silent. Employees pretended not to watch. Victoria finally nodded. You deserve the truth. We moved into a private conference room overlooking the city. Once the door closed behind us, neither of us spoke immediately. Victoria walked to the window before turning back toward me. Do you remember the necklace? She asked. The question caught me completely off guard. What does that have to do with anything? Everything. Confusion replaced some of my anger. Victoria took a slow breath. Months ago, when you told me you had worn it since you were 12, something about it felt familiar. I could not explain why. I stared at her. So you investigated me because of a necklace? No. Her voice remained calm. At first, I investigated you because you were a complete stranger who had unexpectedly entered my life. That is standard procedure for someone in my position. The answer hurt more than I expected. Seeing my expression, Victoria immediately continued. But after that, everything changed. She walked toward the conference table and placed a worn photograph in front of me. My hands froze. The image showed a much younger Victoria standing beside another woman. The woman wore a necklace identical to mine. That is impossible, I whispered. That photograph was taken 24 years ago, Victoria said. Long before I met you. My pulse quickened. I looked from the photograph to the necklace resting against my chest. Who is she? Victoria's expression softened. For years I did not know. She helped me during one of the most difficult periods of my life. We met only briefly. I never learned her full name. I searched for her afterward but never found her. The room suddenly felt smaller. And now? Victoria asked gently. Who gave you that necklace? I swallowed hard. My mother. Neither of us spoke. Victoria closed her eyes for a moment as if a missing piece had finally fallen into place. "That is what I was trying to understand," she said quietly. "Not because I wanted to control your life, because I was trying to discover whether the woman who changed my future all those years ago could somehow be connected to you." I looked down at the photograph again. The revelation answered one question and created 10 more. Most of all, it created a contradiction I could not ignore. If Victoria only recognized the connection after seeing the necklace months ago, why had people been investigating my life before then? And why did it still feel like she was not telling me everything? For a long time, neither of us spoke. I sat staring at the photograph while questions continued racing through my mind. The woman beside the younger Victoria looked so much like my mother that the resemblance felt impossible to ignore. Yet one problem remained. "Victoria," I said quietly, "that still does not explain everything." She nodded slowly. "I know." Her honesty surprised me. She pulled out a chair and sat across from me. For the first time since I had met her, she looked less like a CEO and more like someone carrying a burden she was tired of carrying alone. "When I first had your background reviewed, it had nothing to do with the necklace," she said. "You were a stranger who suddenly became important to me. In my world, people investigate risks before they become problems. I told myself it was professional caution." I looked down at my hands. The explanation hurt, but it made sense. "Then why keep looking?" Victoria took a deep breath. "Because, after I saw the necklace, things stopped being professional." Her eyes met mine. "I realized I wanted answers. Not about your finances or your education, about your family, about your mother, about a connection that seemed impossible." She paused before continuing. "The executives you overheard were not investigating you anymore. They were helping me search old records connected to the woman in that photograph." Suddenly, the contradiction that had haunted me began to unravel. The investigation before the necklace had been routine. The search afterward had been something entirely different. "You should have told me," I whispered. "I know." Regret filled her expression. "I was afraid." "Victoria Sinclair is afraid of things?" A faint smile appeared. "More often than you think." For the first time in days, I almost smiled back. Almost. Victoria leaned forward slightly. "Abigail, there is one more thing you deserve to know." I waited. "The woman in that photograph changed my life because she helped me when I had nothing. Years later, I built a company. I built success, but I never forgot her kindness." Her voice softened. "Then one rainy night, another woman helped me without asking for anything in return." My chest tightened. "You." Neither of us looked away. "That is why I could not stop thinking about you," she said quietly. "Not because of your background, not because of your circumstances, because you reminded me that kindness still exists without conditions." The silence that followed felt completely different from the painful silences we had shared before. This one carried understanding, healing, truth. A few weeks later, my mother visited Chicago. When Victoria met her, the mystery finally ended. The moment they saw each other, recognition appeared in both their eyes. The photograph had been real. The connection had been real. Everything Victoria told me was true. Watching them laugh together over memories from decades earlier felt like watching two missing pieces finally reconnect. As winter slowly gave way to spring, life settled into something peaceful. The foundation continued growing, community programs expanded, scholarship applications increased. Yet the most meaningful changes happened in quieter moments. Morning coffee, long conversations, shared laughter, the comfortable presence of someone who truly understood you. One evening, Victoria and I stood beside the river watching the city lights reflect across the water. The same city that once felt overwhelming now felt like home. "Do you ever regret coming here?" she asked. I smiled. "Not for a second." Victoria looked out at the skyline. "Good. Why?" She turned toward me, her expression warm and completely unguarded. because meeting you was the best thing that happened to me. My heart felt lighter than it had in a very long time. Standing beside her, I realized that some journeys are not about finding success or escaping the past. Sometimes they are simply about finding the person who makes the future feel less frightening. And as we stood together beneath the Chicago skyline, I finally understood that the life I had been searching for was never a place. It was a connection. It was trust. It was hope. And somehow, against all odds, we had found all three. If this story touched your heart, comment the number 8.